One time, Leonardo da Vinci wanted to find out if the anatomy books were correct. So what he did was, in the middle of the night, he snuck out and snuck into a morgue, and he stole dead bodies there and took it to his own home to dissect. And what he found out was that the anatomy books of his time were wrong. And that's one of the things we have learned since around his time, is that if you want to get at the truth, you have to verify your assumptions. Another example was Galileo Galilei. He tried something, he designed an experiment to verify something. For 1500 years, people had thought that feathers and lead, if you drop them, the lead would fall very fast and the feathers wouldn't. And he decided to try it out in a vacuum tube, and there they fell equally fast. And then they realized, okay, that's because the air friction, the feathers feel the air friction and the lead not as much. But if you put them in vacuum, they fall equally fast. And from that period, they kind of discovered that if you want to get at the truth, you have to verify your assumptions, basically. This idea was the basis of empirical sciences, where you, as a scientist, you design an experiment, test, and you have to make sure that you agree with every part of the experiment. You have to verify every aspect of it. You have to make sure you agree with the mathematics you're using. You have to make sure you understand every part of the experimental setup to make sure you don't make mistakes. That is also one reason why an experiment has to be reproducible, because then another artist can reproduce the experiment and try it out and try to also see if they arrive at the same conclusion. Because you want to question the assumption, again, it's about questioning assumption, you want to question the assumption that the previous artist hadn't made a mistake. And also you have to understand that if an artist publishes an article and the results turn out to be wrong, that is kind of the end of their career. So it's a high stakes thing, and even then they make mistakes. There are a few examples I can give. One was chemists have a spectroscopy where they can look at the spectrograph and see lines, and the lines tell them which chemicals are in something. And what they did was they would look at them, these spectrographs, with their eyes and find out where the lines were. But one time they developed a scanner that scanned the lines, and the scanner didn't pick up lines that they did see with their eyes, and they tried to understand why. And then they discovered that it was an optical illusion. If we see two lines, then our eyes, if the white lines are near enough together, then we'll see a third line in between. It's an optical illusion, it's not real. And so they had erroneously always thought that there was a line there that wasn't there. And it's an honest mistake, but you only find out if someone else does the experiment in a slightly different way, because they should still arrive at the same conclusion. Another example was when when scientists were trying to find out how doves can orient themselves. I don't know what the current state is, but I know that back then they didn't know. And they wanted to see if doves can see the polarization direction of light. Light can have a polarization direction, especially when it comes from the sun and is reflected by the sky. Then it has a certain direction where it can be polarized and not. And they wondered if doves could see that. So they created a black box, really with black sides, so that light would not reflect off it. And there were 4 doors on each, there was a door on each side, so 4 doors. And above that they would have a light with a polarization filter, and they could turn it. And if it had a certain polarization direction, then the food would be in one of these 2 doors. And if the polarization direction was turned, it would be in the other 2 doors. And it turned out the doves could see it. So what then happened was other scientists tried to reproduce it. And what they found was they had created their own setup with white walls. And there the doves could not see it. So what turned out to be the case was that yes, the first scientists had used black walls, but apparently light did reflect off those walls a little bit still. So that's how the doves could see it. So they had reached the wrong conclusion because they had made the assumption that these black walls didn't reflect light. So if you want to get at the truth, the one thing you have to do is to question your assumptions and to test. So how does that work for creatives? Well, I can give you a few examples. One is if a designer creates a user interface for software, there's already an assumption that the software will be easy to use, because yeah, that's how you designed it. But what they often do is a usability test. They put a person from the streets behind the computer. They tell the person, listen, if something goes wrong, it's not your fault. We're trying to find mistakes in the software. And they give them an assignment, like do this, try to achieve this task. And they sit next to them. They're not allowed to explain things, not allowed to say things, and they might ask the person to think out loud, so that they know what thought processes are going on. And maybe they're filming, so you can sort of film as people use the user interface. And it is always a humbling experience, because you designed it in such a way that there's a button there, and you're thinking, why are they not seeing that button? Why are they not pressing it? But it's always a humbling experience, because you think you made it easy to use. But there's lots of assumptions that went into it, that people understand that they have to look there for that aspect of it. So that's an interesting thing to do if you create a user interface. And you don't have to test with many people. I find that if you show it to 5 people or so, all 5 people will usually have a problem with the same thing. So you only need to test it on a few people. Stand-up comedians have this cool trick where they develop material at home. They develop their own humor material at home, and actually usually only 20% of it is actually funny. And what they can do is they can go to an open mic night, and there they can present the material to an audience. Imagine what that's like. If you're on stage, the audience is like this huge black hole in front of you, and you're tossing your jokes in there, and you get a reaction from that black hole. It's either silence or roaring laughter, but that's how they can try things out. They go to an open mic night and they try out their new material. And maybe a joke doesn't work yet, so maybe they can tune the pacing or the timing of the setup and the payoff, or maybe it's not a funny joke at all, so they toss it out. But that's how they can sort of check their assumptions that their jokes are funny, by actually trying it out on a real audience. I read once that sometimes with the pre-premiere of a movie, a director might sit in front of the theater and actually watch the audience, because he already knows the film, but he had designed the film in such a way that he hopes that people will be afraid at that point and they will laugh at that point. And it's probably very useful for him to watch the faces of the people. Are they starting to look away? Maybe they are bored. Maybe that's a point at the film where he needs to change something, because he can still fix things. Late in the editing room, he can still change the movie. But it's useful for a director to actually watch his audience and see how they respond to the film. He can still make changes in the editing room. I was once into wordless comics, and I had made several wordless comics. And one time I showed it to one of our friends, and I remember that she was flicking through the images of the wordless comic, and that she was smiling at it, and she was looking, and then when she was almost at the end, she realized that she had missed the story, and so she flicked back to find out what the story was again. So she missed the story because she got so caught up in the imagery, and that was something that was very interesting for me to see. So I was sitting next to her while she was engaging with my art, and I hadn't realized that sort of the art can be distracting in that way from the story. So that was a learning experience, and that makes it very useful to sit next to people and watch as they engage with your art. Because of course you make your art to communicate an idea or evoke a feeling, and the only way to find out is to actually try it out on a real audience. That doesn't mean that you have to redo that drawing, but if you're doing it right, then your art creation should be a process where you're constantly trying new things and trying to create something new. And you can base that off information you got from past experiences, from the previous art you made, from what you feel about it, what you think about it, what your opinion is about your previous work. But also, you can actually sit next to people and watch them as they interact with your work. You can maybe show a social media account where you show them your art, but you can also show them the real physical pieces or show it in another way. It is very useful to sit next to them and to see how they interact with it. I know that's very difficult for us introverts. I mean, we are introverts, right? We like to be alone in our studios. You can't be an artist if you're not an introvert, because you have to be happy to be alone for long periods of time. So it's a bit scary to be among people and show your work, but you will learn a lot from it. But it doesn't mean you have to do anything with that information. You're still the boss. You decide what you do with that information. It might be that you're okay with it. It might be that you're deciding, well, but this art was not made for you, maybe, or I am happy with it, or this is actually how I want to say it. So you don't have to necessarily do anything with the information, but you could learn a lot from it. If you find that people flip back, then you can see that they worry that they might have missed something. If you see them flipping forward, that might be an indication that they are bored. I used this trick in the beginning when I started with my YouTube video. I would sit my daughter in front of the computer, and as soon as she started looking away or looking for something to procrastinate with, I knew that that point it started to be boring for her. So that was something. It's really. The chances are high that you will learn something from sitting next to people as they engage with your work. What can go wrong? Try it out for one time. So for this video, I would propose as an exercise: try to sit next to people when they engage with your work and see how they respond to it. See how they engage with it. Try it once. Maybe it is not useful, but at least, well, you sat next to someone who is looking at your art, so that's not per se a bad thing. But the chances are you will learn quite a few things, and maybe you can or cannot use it in your next piece of art you will make. So, thank you for watching and listening, and hope to see you next time.